The evening was busy at the city hospital. The waiting area was filled with people, some sitting with worried faces, some pacing up and down, waiting for the doctors to call their names. Nurses hurried from one room to another, carrying files and medicine trays. The sound of beeping machines and hurried footsteps made the place feel alive with urgency. Doctors were finishing one surgery and preparing for another. It was a normal evening until something very unusual happened. The automatic doors of the hospital suddenly slid open. Normally people walked in, sometimes limping, sometimes crying, sometimes holding a patient in their arms. But this time it was not a person who entered. Everyone froze as a large German shepherd came through the doors. The dog looked tired and dirty, and it was limping badly. But that was not all. In its powerful jaws, gently but firmly, it held the shirt of a little girl. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old, her face pale, her hair messy and blood running down her arm. The dog was dragging her into the hospital. For a few seconds, no one moved. Patients in the waiting area gasped, some even stood up. A mother covered her child's eyes, thinking maybe this animal was dangerous. Security guards rushed forward, ready to push the dog away. But then they saw the truth. The dog was not attacking the girl, it was saving her. The girl was unconscious but still breathing. The German shepherd barked loudly as if calling for help. The sound echoed in the silent lobby, making doctors and nurses realize what was happening. A nurse dropped her clipboard and ran forward. "Quick, bring a stretcher," she shouted. 2 attendants rushed with a stretcher, and the little girl was gently placed on it. Blood had soaked her sleeve, and her pulse was weak. Doctors knew there was no time to waste. They hurried her toward the emergency room, but the dog did not let go. Even as they wheeled the stretcher, the German shepherd kept close, limping beside it, growling at anyone who tried to block him. When a guard tried to pull the animal back, it bared its teeth in warning, not at the doctors, but at anyone who tried to separate him from the girl. Everyone understood this dog was not dangerous to her. It was her protector. Inside the ER, doctors began preparing for surgery. They cut away the blood-soaked sleeve and started cleaning the wound. The girl had lost a lot of blood, but she still had a chance. They had to act fast. The German shepherd sat right outside the operating room door, refusing to move. Every time the door swung open, it barked once, as if reminding them to hurry, as if it was watching over the girl. Nurses tried to bring him water, but he did not touch it. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, ears alert, body tense, waiting for news. Meanwhile, the waiting room was buzzing with whispers. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Patients who had been complaining about delays now sat quietly, their eyes wide with wonder. Some recorded short clips on their phones, unable to resist capturing the sight of a wounded dog refusing to leave the hospital door. "I've never seen anything like it," one man whispered to another. "The dog brought her here. How did he even know this was a hospital?" The hospital's head of security called the police. An unidentified child with serious injuries had been brought in by an animal, and no one knew who she was or where she came from. Officers promised to arrive soon, but for the staff inside, the only focus was saving the little girl's life. Back inside, the doctors worked in silence, their hands moving quickly. They found deep cuts on her arm and shoulder, possibly from glass or sharp metal. It was hard to tell what had caused it. She had bruises on her legs as though she had fallen or been dragged. The child was fragile, but she was a fighter. With careful stitching, they closed the wounds and gave her fluids to restore her strength. Machines beeped steadily, a small sign of hope. Outside, the dog's body showed signs of struggle too. There were scratches across his back, a bite mark on his leg, and his paw was bleeding from a deep cut. But he showed no pain, no weakness. His eyes stayed on that single door, every muscle tense, waiting for the girl to come out safe. As minutes turned into an hour, the hospital staff began to see the dog not as a threat, but as a hero. Some nurses whispered that it was as if the animal knew exactly where to go, exactly what to do. "He didn't just bring her here," one said softly. "He chose this place." He knew. Finally, the head surgeon stepped out, his mask lowered. "She's stable," he announced. Relief filled the hallway. Nurses clapped their hands lightly. Patients in the waiting area sighed, and one old man whispered, "God bless that dog." The German shepherd barked twice, sharp and loud, then tried to push past the surgeon into the room. The doctor chuckled softly and nodded. "All right, let him see her." The staff gently opened the door and the dog limped inside. He went straight to the bed where the girl lay unconscious, her arm bandaged. Carefully, he placed his head on the side of the bed, watching her chest rise and fall. Only then did he relax for the first time, his tail thumping weakly against the floor. Everyone in the room stood in silence, moved by the sight. A wounded animal, half broken and exhausted, had risked everything to save a child. The girl's identity was still a mystery. No parents had arrived, no relatives had called, no one knew her name. But one thing was clear. This dog had brought her here for a reason, and the story was only just beginning. The little girl had been saved for the moment, but the hospital was still filled with tension. The doctors had managed to stop her bleeding, stitch her wounds, and stabilize her pulse, but she was still unconscious. She needed rest, time, and care. Yet the questions were only beginning. Who was she? Where had she come from? And how had this German shepherd managed to drag her all the way into the hospital, as if he knew exactly what to do? The dog still would not leave her side. The stretcher had been moved into a private recovery room, and nurses were adjusting the IV drip. Every time someone came too close, the German shepherd's ears would perk up, and he would let out a low growl. Not a growl of anger, but a warning: do not harm her. The nurses quickly realized he wasn't being aggressive. His entire body language spoke of worry and protectiveness. He sat near the bed, eyes fixed on the girl, his tail thumping lightly whenever she breathed steadily. The head nurse, a kind woman with decades of experience, leaned down and whispered to her staff, "Let him stay. He won't let us separate them, and maybe she'll recover faster if she wakes up and sees him." Everyone agreed, though the security team was still uneasy. It wasn't every day that a wounded animal guarded a patient in the hospital. Meanwhile, word had spread quickly through the hospital. Staff whispered about the incredible entrance. Some even went to the lobby to check the security cameras. The footage stunned them. An injured German shepherd dragging a limp girl across the street, pushing against the glass doors with his nose, then barking frantically until people noticed. They played the clip again and again, shaking their heads in disbelief. One doctor muttered, "Animals are smarter than we think. He didn't just wander in, he came with a purpose." Outside the hospital, 2 police officers had arrived. They took notes from the staff, looked at the footage, and then came into the recovery room. The dog immediately stood up, his body stiff, his eyes alert. One officer raised his hand gently. "Easy, boy. We're not here to hurt her." But the German shepherd didn't relax. He placed himself right in front of the bed, blocking the officer's view of the child. The officers tried to question the doctors. "Do we know who she is? Any belongings, any ID?" But there was nothing. The girl had been brought in wearing torn clothes, nothing else. The police officer sighed. "We'll need to run a missing child report. We'll check if anyone has reported a girl of her age missing." The nurses nodded, though their eyes kept drifting to the animal. The dog's side still bled slowly from the scratches. His paw left small spots of blood on the floor, but he ignored his own injuries. He only glanced at the girl's face every few seconds, waiting for her to open her eyes. Hours passed, and the hospital moved on with its usual chaos. But the room where the little girl lay remained strangely quiet. Every time the door opened, the German shepherd lifted his head sharply, ready to defend her if necessary. One nurse tried to bring him food. He sniffed it but pushed it aside with his nose. When they brought a bowl of water, he only took one quick sip, then returned to watching the girl. His dedication touched the hearts of everyone. Finally, one of the younger doctors spoke up. "We should treat the dog too. He's bleeding and his paw looks badly cut. If we don't, he might get an infection." The nurses agreed, but no one dared to take him away from the girl. So instead, they brought a small medical kit into the room. Slowly, carefully, one nurse crouched down with bandages. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. The dog growled at first, but when she pointed to the girl and then back to herself as if saying, "I'm here to help her too," the animal seemed to understand. He stayed still while they cleaned his wounds, flinching only once when disinfectant stung his paw. He did not bite, did not resist. He simply looked back at the girl again and again, as though reminding himself why he had to endure the pain. Later that night, the head surgeon walked into the room. He studied the girl's condition and then turned to the staff. "She's stable for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. If she wakes up, she may tell us what happened. Until then, we can only guess." The German shepherd tilted his head almost as if he understood those words. He gave a soft whine and lay down, resting his head on his front paws, his eyes never leaving the girl's face. In the lobby, the police spoke with the head of security again. "This is unusual. A child appears out of nowhere injured, brought in by a dog. If her parents don't show up soon, we may have a serious case on our hands. Maybe even a crime." The security head agreed. "And the dog, he's not a stray. Look at him. Even without a collar, you can see he's well-fed, strong, trained. He belongs to someone." The officers left to file reports, promising to return with more information. But in the hospital, the story of the dog spread like wildfire. Other patients peeked through the glass of the recovery room just to catch a glimpse. Some even whispered prayers for the little girl. Others simply stared, unable to believe that a dog had done what so many humans might not have been able to do: save a life in time. By midnight, the hospital halls were quieter. Most of the waiting room had emptied, but in that single room the dog still stood guard. Nurses checked the girl's vitals every hour. Each time the dog watched closely, his ears twitching, his eyes sharp, making sure they did not harm her. They were gentle, and eventually he seemed to relax, even letting one nurse stroke his fur. For a brief moment his eyes softened, but the second she left the room he was alert again. Around 2 a.m., something unexpected happened. The girl stirred. It was only a small movement, her fingers twitching, her eyelids fluttering, but the German shepherd noticed immediately. He leapt to his feet and barked once, sharp and urgent. The nurses rushed in. The dog backed up just a step, letting them near, but his eyes shone with hope. The girl tried to speak, but her voice was weak. The nurse leaned down. "Shh, don't try to talk. You're safe now." The dog whimpered and licked her hand gently. Her eyes opened just slightly, and though her vision was blurry, she seemed to recognize him. A faint smile touched her lips before she drifted back into sleep. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. Everyone in the room could feel it. The bond between the child and the animal was unbreakable. Outside, the police car lights flashed faintly in the distance as officers searched the neighborhood. Inside, the doctors watched over the girl while the German shepherd kept his silent guard. The mystery of who she was and what had happened still hung in the air, but one thing was clear to all who saw them. This was no ordinary dog, and this was no ordinary night. The next morning, the hospital was already alive with movement before the sun had fully risen. Doctors hurried through the corridors, nurses prepared their rounds, and patients waited for their names to be called. But one room in the children's ward had become the center of everyone's attention. Inside that room, the mysterious little girl still lay unconscious, her arm wrapped in fresh bandages, an IV dripping slowly into her vein. Beside her bed, as faithful as a shadow, the German shepherd remained. The dog had not left her side all night. His body was weak from blood loss, but his spirit was unshaken. Every time a nurse entered the room to check the girl's vitals, the dog raised his head sharply, studying their every movement. Only when he saw that they meant no harm did he lower his head back down. His loyalty amazed the staff. They had seen family members faint from exhaustion while sitting beside their loved ones. Yet here was an animal, fighting pain and hunger, refusing to rest properly until the girl was safe. Around mid-morning, a small crowd of hospital workers gathered outside the room, whispering softly. "It's like he understands everything," one of them said. "Did you see how he wouldn't eat until they treated her? And when she stirred last night, he barked to call us in. That wasn't coincidence." But the girl had still not woken fully, and the police had no new leads. Missing child reports were being checked, but nothing matched her description yet. For now, the only clues were her injuries and the presence of this remarkable dog. Later that morning, something happened that shook the staff even more. One of the senior doctors was inside adjusting the girl's IV line when the monitor beeped irregularly. It was a simple technical fault. The machine needed to be reset. But before the doctor could act, the German shepherd barked loudly and pawed at the machine. He looked from the monitor to the doctor, barking again as if demanding action. The doctor blinked in surprise. "It's almost like he knows the machine isn't working," he murmured. The nurse beside him nodded slowly. "He's not just guarding her, he's watching over her care." Word spread quickly, and soon more staff came by just to witness the dog's strange intelligence. Some believed he was simply reacting to noises, but others whispered that he seemed to understand far more than an ordinary animal. In the afternoon, 2 police detectives returned. They had brought photographs of missing children to see if the staff could recognize the girl. When they entered the room, the dog immediately stood up, his body stiff and his eyes sharp. The officers stayed near the door, not daring to get too close. One detective pulled out a notebook. "Still nothing?" he asked the head nurse. She shook her head. "She hasn't woken properly. Just a brief moment last night. But she's still too weak to talk." The dog gave a low growl. The detective frowned. "He doesn't like us," the nurse smiled faintly. "He doesn't like anyone near her who isn't here to help." The officers eventually left, but their words lingered. If no one came forward soon, the child might remain a mystery forever. That evening, as the sun set, the hospital halls grew quieter again. The German Shepherd was finally coaxed into drinking more water, though he still refused food. His injuries had been bandaged the day before, but he limped slightly as he shifted position near the girl's bed. A young nurse entered with a tray of supplies. As she reached over to adjust the girl's bandage, the dog lifted his head and made a soft sound, half growl, half whine. The nurse paused, her hands trembling. "I'm just helping her," she whispered. She carefully unwrapped the old bandage, cleaned the wound, and replaced it. The dog watched every movement with hawk-like intensity. When she was finished, he sniffed the fresh bandage as if making sure it was safe. Only then did he settle back down. Hours ticked by and the hospital quieted for the night. A gentle rain tapped against the windows. The girl stirred again, her eyelids fluttering. The dog immediately stood, wagging his tail lightly, and gave a hopeful bark. Nurses rushed in, their faces filled with anticipation. The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. One nurse leaned closer. Then faintly came the softest whisper. "Max." The dog barked once, a joyful sound that startled everyone in the room. His tail wagged harder and he licked the girl's hand gently. The nurses exchanged surprised looks. "She knows him," one whispered. The girl tried to say more, but her strength faded and she slipped back into sleep. Still, that single word changed everything. Max, that was the dog's name. And it meant that this animal was not just a stray. He belonged to her. The following morning, doctors and nurses gathered around the bed. They spoke in hushed tones about the word she had whispered. "If she remembers his name, then soon she may remember what happened," one doctor said. That could give us answers, but the mystery only deepened. Staff who cared for the girl began noticing more strange behavior from the dog. When a nurse once dropped a small tray of instruments, Max barked and pushed the tray away with his paw, almost as if he feared the sharp objects near the child. Another time, when the IV tube kinked and the drip slowed, he whined and nudged the tube until a nurse noticed. Whispers spread through the hospital like wildfire. Patients who had never seen the dog began to hear about him. The dog that saved the girl, people said. The guardian angel in fur. Some staff even joked that Max was helping with the medical work. But beneath the humor was real awe. Something about this animal seemed extraordinary. By evening, the detectives returned once more. This time they watched the girl closely as she shifted in her sleep. They noticed the way Max pressed against her side protectively, his eyes glowing with quiet determination. One detective leaned to the other and whispered, "I think this dog knows more than anyone else in this building." The other nodded. "Then maybe when the girl wakes again, we'll finally learn the truth." That night, the rain outside turned into a storm, thunder rumbling softly in the distance. Inside the hospital, the girl slept peacefully, her hand resting on Max's fur. The German Shepherd closed his eyes for the first time in days, but even in his rest, his body remained tense, ready to wake if danger came. The staff, the police, and even the patients all knew now this was not just a loyal pet. This was a guardian who had carried a wounded child to safety, who watched over her with the focus of a parent, and who seemed to understand far more than anyone could explain. The girl's faint whisper of Max was the first key, but the lock of the full mystery was still waiting to be opened. The storm passed overnight, leaving the air cool and fresh. Morning light crept through the hospital windows, brightening the children's ward. In the small recovery room, the girl finally began to wake. Her eyelids fluttered open, her breathing quickened, and her tiny hand moved against the blanket. At once, the German Shepherd lifted his head, his ears standing tall. He gave a soft bark, filled with excitement but careful not to frighten her. Nurses rushed in and the dog stepped aside just enough to let them approach, though his watchful eyes never left her. The girl blinked slowly. At first, confusion clouded her face. She seemed lost between dreams and reality. Then she turned her head and saw the dog beside her. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Max," she whispered. The sound was weak, but it was clear. Max wagged his tail furiously, pressing his head gently against her arm as if to say, "I am here. You are safe." The nurses looked at one another in relief. One of them hurried out to call the doctors and the police detectives who had been waiting for this moment. Within minutes, the room filled with people eager for answers. The head doctor bent down close to the girl. "You're safe now," he said softly. "We're taking care of you. Can you tell us your name?" Her lips trembled, and after a pause, she whispered, "Sophie." The word came out slowly, but it was clear enough. Max barked once proudly as though confirming the truth. The detectives leaned forward, notebooks ready. "Sophie," one said kindly. "That's a beautiful name. Can you tell us what happened to you?" Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. Her little body shivered, and Max whined, licking her hand gently to give her comfort. She clutched his fur as if drawing strength from him. Then haltingly she began to speak. Her words were broken and soft, but each one was heavy with meaning. Sophie explained that she lived in a small house outside the city with her parents. Max was their family dog, her best friend and guardian since she was a baby. He had always stayed close to her, following her to school, playing in the yard, and sleeping at the foot of her bed. Life had been happy until that terrible night. According to Sophie, strangers had broken into their home. She remembered her father shouting, her mother screaming, and Max barking furiously. There had been chaos, noise, and fear. Her parents tried to shield her, but she was grabbed and dragged away. Max had fought bravely, biting and clawing at the intruders, but Sophie was still taken. She was injured during the struggle, and everything after that was a blur. The next thing she remembered clearly was Max pulling her through the darkness, guiding her step by step until the bright lights of the hospital appeared. The room fell silent as Sophie spoke. Nurses listened with wide eyes, doctors with somber faces. The detectives wrote quickly, exchanging serious looks. This was no simple accident. This was a crime. One detective crouched beside the bed. "Sophie," he said gently, "you are very brave. You helped us a lot by telling us this. Do you know where your parents are now?" Sophie shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "They tried to protect me," she whispered. "I don't know what happened to them." Max gave a low growl, his eyes hardening as though remembering the fight. The detective placed a hand on Sophie's blanket. "Don't worry. We will find them. And we will find the people who hurt you." The girl clung tighter to Max. "He saved me," she said. "He didn't let them take me away. He brought me here." The detective nodded with respect. "He's a hero, Sophie. He's the reason you're alive." After Sophie's statement, the detectives left the room to make urgent calls. Police teams were sent to her neighborhood, and soon reports came back. Her house had indeed been broken into. There were signs of struggle, overturned furniture, and broken glass. But there was no trace of her parents. The investigation quickly revealed something even darker. The intruders were part of a group involved in child trafficking. They targeted families, often in quiet neighborhoods, hoping to take children away unnoticed. The staff at the hospital were horrified as the news spread. Everyone realized how close Sophie had come to vanishing forever, if not for Max. Somehow, wounded and exhausted, he had fought through the danger, pulled Sophie from the clutches of evil, and brought her to the one place where she could be saved. Meanwhile, Max's own injuries worsened. Though his cuts had been cleaned and bandaged, infection threatened to set in. His paw was swollen, and he limped more heavily with each step. Yet he refused to rest. Even as doctors tried to lead him away for treatment, he resisted, planting himself firmly beside Sophie's bed. Only when she stroked his fur and whispered, "It's okay. Max, they'll help you," did he finally allow the nurses to take him to the veterinary unit connected to the hospital. There, veterinarians worked quickly, cleaning his wounds more thoroughly, stitching the deeper gashes and giving him medicine for pain. Max endured it all silently, his eyes calm but focused, as though reminding himself that he must recover to keep protecting Sophie. When it was over, he was allowed back into her room, where he immediately laid his head on her lap, tail wagging softly. Sophie's strength grew slowly over the next days. She spoke more, telling stories of how Max had always been her protector. She remembered how he once stood between her and a large stray dog, how he barked whenever strangers came too close to their gate, and how he even followed her to school until her teacher kindly walked him back home. Each story painted the picture of an animal who was far more than a pet. He was family. The police investigation uncovered more shocking details. They tracked down the criminals involved in the break-in, and after days of searching, they managed to arrest several members of the group. Evidence confirmed that Sophie had been their target, and without Max's intervention, she might never have been found again. The hospital staff followed the news closely. Every nurse, doctor, and patient in the building felt proud of Max, treating him like a hero among humans. The story of the dog who saved the little girl spread beyond the hospital walls. Local reporters began gathering outside, eager to capture the miraculous tale. Strangers left flowers, toys, and cards addressed to Sophie and Max. One evening, as Sophie sat up in her bed for the first time, she looked at Max, who rested quietly beside her. She stroked his fur and whispered, "You never gave up on me." Max raised his head and licked her cheek, his eyes shining with love. The staff watching from the doorway felt tears in their eyes. They had seen many patients, many recoveries, but this bond between child and dog was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. The truth was now clear. Sophie had survived because of Max's bravery, loyalty, and intelligence. He was not just her companion, he was her savior. And though questions remained about her parents, everyone in the hospital knew that Sophie was alive because one dog had refused to abandon her, no matter the cost. That night, as Sophie drifted to sleep, she whispered one last time, "Thank you, Max." The dog closed his eyes, breathing deeply, finally allowing himself to rest beside her. The storm outside had passed, and for the first time in days, both girl and dog felt a sense of peace. The days that followed became some of the most unforgettable ones in the hospital's history. The story of Sophie and Max spread far beyond the white walls and quiet corridors. News outlets picked it up, reporters stood outside the building with cameras, and headlines flashed across television screens. German Shepherd saves little girl from unknown attackers. Brave dog brings child into hospital alone. And miracle guardian with 4 legs. Inside Sophie's room, life began to feel brighter. The little girl grew stronger each day. Her cheeks regained color, and her voice, once faint and trembling, became clear. She laughed softly when nurses teased her and smiled brightly whenever Max placed his big head on her lap. For Sophie, healing was not just about medicine. It was about knowing her best friend never left her side. The staff had grown attached to the pair. Doctors who usually spoke only in clipped professional tones found themselves stopping by just to greet Sophie. Nurses brought small treats for Max, who was finally beginning to eat again. Even patients in other rooms asked for updates, as if Sophie and Max's story gave them hope too. But there were still unanswered questions. The police continued their search for Sophie's parents. Each day they returned with updates, and finally, after a week of uncertainty, they brought news. Sophie's parents had survived the attack. They had been injured and taken to another hospital outside the city during the chaos of the night. When they learned that Sophie had been saved and was safe, they broke down in tears. Plans were made immediately to reunite the family. The day of the reunion was one of the most emotional moments the hospital had ever witnessed. Sophie sat upright in her bed, her hands clutching Max's fur nervously. The door opened slowly and her parents entered. Her mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped Sophie in a trembling embrace. Her father held them both tightly, his eyes shining with relief. Sophie sobbed softly, whispering again and again, "I thought I lost you." Max barked joyfully, circling around them before resting at Sophie's side. The family reached out and hugged him too, their gratitude too big for words. The doctors and nurses standing outside the room wiped tears from their eyes. It was not just a reunion. It was the restoration of a family that had been torn apart. News of the reunion only deepened the admiration for Max. Reporters called him a hero. The police, moved by his bravery, decided to honor him formally. A small ceremony was arranged in the hospital courtyard. Patients, staff, and townspeople gathered to watch. Children held handmade signs that read, "Thank you, Max," and "Hero Dog." The police chief stepped forward, holding a medal on a ribbon. "This dog," he said to the crowd, "did what many humans could not. He fought against danger, protected an innocent child, and led her to safety. For that, he deserves our highest recognition." As applause filled the courtyard, Max stood tall beside Sophie. His wounds had healed, though faint scars remained on his leg and paw. The medal was placed gently around his neck, and the crowd cheered. Sophie clapped her hands and hugged him tightly, whispering into his ear, "You're my hero forever." From that day on, Max was more than just a family pet. He became a symbol of courage and loyalty. Schools told his story to inspire children, reminding them of bravery and love. Newspapers called him the guardian of the city. People sent gifts, not only for Sophie but for Max too, boxes of treats, blankets, and even a custom collar engraved with the words protector and friend. But for Sophie, none of the medals or gifts mattered as much as the simple fact that Max was still with her. She often told anyone who listened, "Max saved me because he loves me. That's all." Her parents nodded, their hearts forever grateful to the animal who had carried their daughter back from the edge of danger. Life slowly returned to normal for Sophie and her family, though they knew things would never be exactly the same. Their home was repaired and the police ensured their safety. The criminals who had attacked them were arrested, thanks to Sophie's bravery in telling her story. Justice was served, and the dark shadow over the family finally began to lift. One afternoon, weeks after Sophie's recovery, she and Max walked out of the hospital together for the first time. The sun was warm, the sky was blue, and the air carried the scent of flowers from the courtyard garden. Sophie wore a small cast on her arm, but she smiled as she held Max's leash tightly. People in the courtyard clapped and cheered as the pair passed by, celebrating their survival. Max walked proudly beside her, his tail swishing like a flag. He didn't understand the cheers, the cameras, or the fame. All he understood was that Sophie was safe and that he was exactly where he belonged, by her side. In the weeks that followed, Sophie's story inspired countless people. Letters poured in from strangers across the country. Some wrote to say they were moved to adopt dogs from shelters after hearing about Max. Others wrote that the story gave them hope during their own struggles. It was more than just a tale of survival. It became a reminder of the deep bond between humans and animals, and the extraordinary power of loyalty. Months later, Sophie sat in her backyard, the evening sun painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Max lay stretched out beside her, his head resting on her lap. She stroked his fur gently, whispering, "You saved me once, Max, but every day you save me again just by being here." Max lifted his head, his eyes calm and wise, and gave a soft bark. Sophie giggled, hugging him tightly. For her, the unbelievable part wasn't just what had happened in the hospital or the recognition Max received. The unbelievable part was knowing that in the darkest moment of her life, her best friend had refused to give up on her. The world moved on, but for Sophie and Max, life was now about simple joys, walks in the park, quiet nights at home, and the unspoken promise between them. No matter what happened, they would always stand by each other, and so, the story of the German shepherd who walked into a hospital with a wounded little girl became a legend people told again and again. But for Sophie, it wasn't a legend at all. It was her life. It was her miracle. It was Max,